And I'd like to introduce our special guest tonight, Mike Fegelman, who is the Executive Director of Honest Reporting Canada, an organization dedicated to promoting fair and accurate coverage of Israel in the Canadian media. Honest Reporting Canada has over 17,000 members across Canada working together to monitor and improve coverage of Israel in Canadian newspapers, on TV, on radio, and on the internet. It is a non-profit organization supported by personal donations, large and small, from individual Canadians. Mr. Fegelman is a graduate of Carleton University, and though he started out in Thornhill, he lives very close to the show now. He is a renowned, he took a journalism program there. He specializes in broadcasting and international reporting and was a former editor and writer for Centretown News, a former lead anchor and reporter for both CUTV and CKCU's Midweek program in Ottawa, Ontario. Mr. Fegelman has been at Honest Reporting Canada for over 4 years now and has helped build Honest Reporting Canada into the successful organization it is today. Please welcome him with me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me in the back, just to make sure we have audio levels are all okay? Okay, great. If I could get a show of hands, just out of curiosity, how many of you are actually familiar with the brand of Honest Reporting? Okay, so it looks like a majority. To just give you a very brief description of what we are, we're a media watchdog company, and essentially our goal and our mandate is to ensure fair and accurate Canadian media coverage of Israel. I want this presentation to be as interactive as it can be. It's a small group, so please feel free to raise your hands if you have any questions. I want to start off by asking you a question, which it might be a very obvious answer, but I want to hear what you have to say. It goes like this, In your interpretation, are the Canadian news media biased against Israel? Yes, I hear emphatic yeses. I hear, I don't hear any no's. Gentleman in the back.
Some. The Toronto Star gets over the coals for being biased against Israel. They canceled a lot of our ads and things like that. But I want to say something on behalf of the Star. Not that I'm the greatest advocate, but I'm a journalist, and I must say something. When we use the word the abused and the underdog, the Star always aims to that direction. Once you're not the underdog, you shift to the underdog. So basically, if you look into it, you'll see what I'm saying.
Okay. I appreciate that, and I think that a lot of people within the Toronto Jewish community, years ago, had a lot of problems with the Toronto Star's reporting. I have no problem going on record as saying that I think the Toronto Star does a fantastic job in producing fair, accurate, and balanced content about Israel and about the broader Middle East. Everyone can have their own opinion, but a lot has been made of the motives for reporters and of news organizations, as if what's in somebody's heart or mind really matters. For instance, people accuse the Asper family of a bias because they're Jewish and they're very strong supporters of Israel. Now, that being said, the late Israel Asper, the former controlling owner of CanWest Communications, he often accused the media of having a sort of a left-wing Marxist mentality, wherein he thought that the media always rooted for the Palestinian underdogs and favored their narrative. I should say that as an organization, I don't really care if an individual is anti-Semitic or anti-Israel. I'm really concerned with the fact that whatever they're reporting is both fair and accurate, it's complete, it's as the news actually happened behind the lens of the camera. So, a lot of people will say, this particular news outlet is anti-Israel. At the same time, I would beg the question, can you qualify that statement and prove tangibly why a particular media outlet might be that case if you believe it to be true? As an organization, we're trying to do real research. We want to make sure that the media are, for one, reporting on the horrible Qassam rocket attacks on the Israeli cities like Sderot and Ashkelon. If, for instance, a particular media outlet gives no reference at all for what's going on in the region, that's a serious problem. That's a problem for all of us. And I'd encourage you to try to be media literate, to be a media ambassador for Israel. Because essentially, as an organization, we can only do so much. But obviously, as you know, with the power of numbers, the more that we grow, and we have, I mentioned 17,000, we're coming to about 18,000 members, but the more people that can actually monitor the media and respond when necessary, the more change that we can affect. I should also say that as an organization, we're not blanket apologists for the government of Israel, and we don't support every policy that the Israeli government puts forth. But we do ask that the media give Israel a fair shake. If I'm guilty of a particular bias, it's in the sense that I'm not monitoring the media's coverage for Saudi Arabian media or Jordanian media or Syrian media. There are other organizations out there doing that, but if I'm guilty of a particular bias, I guess it's in the sense that my day-to-day focus is to monitor how the media are reporting on Israel. So, I urge you to sort of judge my comments for what they're worth, and let me know if you think that what I'm saying comes off as reasonable. But I think it's worth discussing some of the main and key impediments to really good media coverage of the Middle East. A lot of people don't know that, if you look at a place like Jerusalem, there's about 500 different news crews who are posted to the region. Next to Moscow and Washington, this is just the third highest concentration of journalists in the world. So this leads an effect. You've got, per news crew, you have a reporter, producer, and a cameraman. It's something like 1,500. There's thousands of reporters and news professionals who are basically putting a magnifying glass on Israel and about the region. Now, they live in Jerusalem, and I think it's very obvious why they do. Israel is a society that boasts a very free and vibrant free press. You contrast this with the broader Arab world, where if you report something that's critical about a tyrannical government that exists that's repressing the rights of its own people, odds are you're either going to have the secret police on you, you're going to be detained, you might even be killed. You look at what happened to Canadian photojournalist Zara Cosme, a lady who took a picture and was murdered because she did so. So in understanding the disparity of freedom of the press that exists in Israel versus the broader Middle East, it's easy to understand why certain stories come to light and certain ones don't. But journalists live in Jerusalem. They live there because it's safe to do so. They can say anything about the Israeli government without fear that they're going to be murdered. Think about that. If you go into some of the Palestinian areas, into Lebanon, there's a very serious intimidation of the press that exists, and certain stories essentially go out of sight and out of mind because there is a fear among journalists to be critical of a terrorist regime. But being that all these journalists live in Jerusalem and they're so concentrated, you basically have, it's kind of a herd mentality where, they all have this same mindset. You tend to see the same story being spewed out by all these different news organizations. And, there's very little contrarian thought. There's very little independent thinking, and it's kind of a lowest common denominator way of thinking. But we have to understand that these foreign correspondents who are posted to the region, for some reason, and I don't know what it is, but we, as a community, as individuals, we tend to think of them as experts, as historians, that they are completely knowledgeable about every specific detail about, resolutions and land treaties and deals, about the key players. We have to understand, for one, that reporting about the Arab-Israeli conflict in the Middle East, it is quite possibly one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult jobs in journalism today. But these journalists, they lack a good grasping of some of the nuances and subtleties in terms of language, in terms of the shared history of a common people. Because of this, a lot of very simple errors happen. And it's a lot of naivete, and it's a lot of ignorance. But basically, journalists are pretty much parachuted into the region. They're told, you cover this story. We see what's happening now right now in Gaza, and there's what's been labeled the Palestinian Gazan exodus. Basically, I can tell you you can see that there's basically been shipped, thousands of journalists have been, it's a huge story. News crews are being sent to cover this story. Now, these are people who have never reported on the region, who are now telling one of the most difficult stories. Now, and also understanding this, to make it even more difficult, Israel, for the most part, you can get by with English. But if you go into certain areas of the Gaza Strip, where it's essentially Arabic, certain areas of Israel are only Hebrew, most of these foreign journalists, they speak English. Because they don't speak the local language, because they don't know the local culture, they have to rely on people who are called stringers, guides, or handlers. People are going to take around these journalists to a bunch of unique areas who are going to give them kind of a skewed PR agenda. They're going to show them, whatever they want them to see. And I should say that these kind of stringers, it's not just specific for the Middle East. You have people in Russia who are stringers, you have people in Canada who are stringers. But just in understanding that this is just part and process of what journalism is in the region. But when we think about some further impediments, some of the news coverage about the Middle East, we tend to see happy news, do we? I mean, you open up the page of the Globe and Mail or the Toronto Star, you hear stories about suffering, about oppression, about terrorism, people dying. We hear stories like this because really, when it comes down to it, the bottom line of a newspaper or of a news organization, apart from being a public entity like the CBC, they really are designed, and they really want to increase circulation, increase advertising dollars, make money. They are business first, and I think a service second. And that's my opinion, but you can have with it what you will. But there's an old news maxim that I think holds very true. We tend to see stories about terrorism because if it bleeds, it leads. We don't see happy stories, but we all know that Israel boasts just incredible advances in medicine and science and technology, but we don't tend to see that. We tend to see images of people suffering, something that I think we'd like to work with the media to change, to paint an accurate picture of what Israel actually is. I think it's something that we can work with our members and actually achieve. So what I'd like to do through this presentation, show you a bunch of good examples that we've come across of media bias that we saw in the Canadian media, and I want to show you how we engage with the media to try to affect some kind of a reasonable remedy and change. I should say, as an organization, we really want to be a moderate influence. There are a lot of people who are very passionate, who maybe a little too vocal, a little bit too strident. As an organization, we don't want to be knee-jerk reactionary. We want to engage with the media in a professional manner, engage in a constructive dialogue. It's something very difficult to do because it's a topic that we have a lot of vested interest in. But I think over time, by having a moderate approach, we've been able to secure a lot of good, tangible successes. So I'll show you some of those. I think this quote by Mark Twain says it best. This is sort of the catch-22 of reporting. If you can't read it, I'll just read it quickly for you. It says, if you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed, and if you do read the newspaper, you're misinformed. So I should tell you that it sounds like, exactly. I come into my office, and I've got a stack of newspapers on my desk, and my job is to read those newspapers. I'm paid to do it. So I wouldn't encourage you to read 30 newspapers. I wouldn't. I also listen to all these radio broadcasts, television, and check out the online content as well. So I spend a good 6 hours a day reading and critiquing, analyzing. Essentially, I'm putting a magnifying glass, just as they have on Israel, but I'm doing it on them. I would encourage you to be media literate. I would hope that at the very least you read the news once a day. If you're going to read a newspaper, if you're going to listen to the radio, if you're going to watch CBC The National, CTV News National, read something. But some of the most simplest errors that I've come across have been by just comparing and contrasting. If I read a report, for instance, in the Toronto Star that may have a certain slant versus another in the Globe and Mail, you can spot disparities and errors so easily. So again, I wouldn't say read a couple thousand newspapers, but read as much as you can, because it's, as advocates and ambassadors for the state of Israel, it's important that we understand the issues, that in order to try to advance fair and accurate media coverage, we really have to be educated about what's going on in the region. So I mentioned the kind of images that we see when the media are reporting on the region. Here you have it here, bus bombings. You have pictures of Israeli soldiers with guns, Palestinians throwing stones, and Palestinians against what sometimes the media would actually refer to as the apartheid wall, which is obviously more accurately referred to as the security barrier. There's a lot of problems with images, and I would always encourage you that whenever you see a picture appended and attached to an article in any newspaper, look at it and always question, for one, what is going on beyond the lens of the camera, and always question the caption that's attached to it. Does it give context for what is actually happening? So here's a picture that was sent out by a wire source. It's a picture of a Palestinian youth throwing a stone. This is a picture that's been sent out over the wire. I can only imagine and estimate how many different news organizations picked it up. But who is this Palestinian throwing a stone at? The caption read something to the effect of Palestinian throwing stone. It's about 6 words. Let's, again, asking questions. Is he throwing the stone at a wall? Is he playing handball? Is he throwing it at another Palestinian? Is he throwing it at an Israeli soldier? I really don't know. Again, also, one thing that the problem with photos are, especially for size to fit into a newspaper, a lot of the times they're condensed and they're edited. So this is a particular photo which is pretty poignant, but it shows that there's a lot of people behind the scenes who, is this a stage scene? Is this a dangerous scenario? If you can't see in the back, here you have a picture of a Palestinian being surrounded by, all too willing photographers to take this gentleman's picture. So again, in asking the question, is the news staged? I wouldn't contend that all of it is, but I would contend that at times it is. Now, how did these photographers know to be here? I mean, if you look at them, look at their positioning. They're sitting in a staggered position. The guy in the far right, he's wearing a football helmet. Is this a dangerous scenario? The guy in the middle, in the white shirt, he's smiling. What's the deal? Well, how come we didn't see this full, unedited picture? How come we didn't see that there were photographers surrounding this guy? Why did we get an edited image? Keep that in your head. I'll leave that as rhetorical. Here's another picture. It's a picture of a Palestinian woman at the security barrier. Now, how many of you actually know the dimensions of the barrier? Gentleman in the back? You've been there. Well, a lot of people don't know that the barrier is actually 95% fence and 5% wall. But what kind of photos do we see, what kind of photos do we see being sent out and attached to the articles in our Canadian newspapers? We see pictures of the large, tall concrete sections because that's a more dramatic and symbolic example. But the reality is it's really a jaded image. The reality is it's 95% fence. But we see this image of Palestinians at the wall, and it's this image of oppression. Now here's a picture of a Palestinian woman. It may be a little hard to see, but in her right hand she's holding a picture of her house, and in the left she's got a key to symbolize the destruction of her home. Reasons which we don't know, nor does this photographic caption actually indicate. Was her home destroyed as a result by the IDF as the result of, was she harboring terrorists? Were there munitions in her house? I have no idea. But again, what goes on beyond the lens of the camera in an unedited image is very telling. Again, photographers who are there to take this lady's picture. Now, you're an educated audience. You must know that do regular people just happen to be taking a leisurely stroll at the security barrier with a photograph of their house? Did they just keep it in their knapsack? And there just happened to be all of these photographers there? Something's got to give. Now, it's also not just a coincidence that in the 1%, or in the one section of the 5% part of the barrier, which is concrete, that she's standing with a backdrop. If you can read, it's a little hard, but the backdrop, it's a very specific image there. What does it say? Stop, kill the Palestinians. Again, a cropped up image. This is a picture that's being sent out over the wires, telling a very specific example. It is very clever. These photographers were duped, or rather complicit. I mean, this is a very serious piece of propaganda. Sorry, I'm going to get your question in just a bit. We're going to do it a little end. But I mean, look at that. It's very obvious. Now, in asking the question, is some of the news staged? There's a film called Pallywood, done by a guy named Richard Landis, I think. And he has an organization called Second Draft, which really did a good, thorough investigation. I'd encourage you to check it out as well. It's seconddraft.org. And he basically came to the conclusion, and a lot of people would argue, that there are people in the Palestinian territories, in areas of the Middle East, who are producers, who are actors, directors, writers, people who are involved in the process of creating news for the benefit of it being recycled by the news media to malign the state of Israel. I'm going to show you a quick clip, and we can have a brief discussion about it.
One prize President Clinton will not take with him when he leaves office in January is peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. He tried, but it just didn't work out. In fact, what's happening over there right now is looking more and more like a war, the latest Arab-Israeli war. The fiercest battles in the Middle East were waged right here at the crossroad, at that army post which is there to protect a settlement which is the focal point of Palestinian rage. In this one tiny area, which Palestinians now call the Martyrs' Junction, more than 30 were killed and hundreds were wounded.
Millions of viewers watch this in-depth news report. Scenes like these of action and injury are broadcast all over the world, flashed on the screen in dramatic sight bites, presented in a larger storyline. They're a major source of information about the enduring Arab-Israeli conflict. And yet, something is amiss, something that escapes the attention of news editors and viewers alike. Let's examine these images in their original context, the raw footage from which reporters and news editors piece together their stories. Most of the scenes you're about to see were filmed by Palestinian cameramen working independently, employed and equipped by Western news agencies at Netzarim Junction in the Gaza Strip on September 30th, 2000. The Israeli police station is here. The Palestinian here. Next to the Israeli position, there's a factory twice as tall as the Israeli post. Behind are two residential towers known as the Twins. Palestinian and Israeli policemen had been doing joint patrols as stipulated in the Oslo Accords. On this day, angry crowds with stones and Molotov cocktails gathered at the junction, attacked the Israeli outpost, and were joined by Palestinian police firing their guns. This scene, apparently of a Palestinian man shot by Israelis and evacuated in an ambulance, was captured by a Palestinian cameraman working for French public television, Channel 2. A shot rings out. The man falls to the ground clutching his right leg. The ambulance pulls up in seconds. Fortunately, we can see this scene caught from a different angle by another Palestinian cameraman working for a major news agency. We see three men, apparently under fire, drag the wounded man roughly across the pavement toward the back of the ambulance. But if they were under fire, why did the ambulance stop so far short of the man, forcing the others to drag him back, rather than move forward and protect him from the fire? And if he were injured, is this a way to evacuate an injured man? But wait, he was supposedly hit on the right side of the right leg, presumably by a bullet. And yet, as they load him on the stretcher, we see no trace of blood on that side of his right leg. And then the medics load him on the supposedly injured leg, without sign of protest from the casualty himself. Could this scene have been staged? Could the immediate appearance of the ambulance have come on cue? This case is not clear. It could be real, it could be staged. The media, however, assumed it was real and made it news.
15 heures, tout vient de basculer près de l'implantation de Netzarim dans la bande de Gaza.
Let us consider another battle scene filmed that day, or possibly the day after. A Palestinian gunman fires into a hole in the wall. It looks like a tense moment of house-to-house fighting. We would assume he's firing at the Israelis. He is firing in their direction, but he can't be firing at them. Here he is, on the far side of the factory building, completely out of range of the Israeli position. Are Israeli soldiers inside the factory? All witnesses concur. They never left their fortified position. Earlier footage gives us a look inside the hole in the wall. The street fighter is conversing with his comrades inside the room he will soon be spraying with gunfire. A large crowd, mostly civilians, and a few men in military garb, mills around as Palestinian soldiers climb in and out of the hole in the wall. Note the civilians giving orders to a military man. Does this look like a war zone? Orders come to clear the area. Military men line up as if they're taking cover, but from what? Not Israeli bullets. And now, the street fighter runs up to the hole in the wall and fires into the empty room. The raw footage clearly indicates a staged scene. A sight bite became news. Consider a third scene. This funeral procession was filmed by an Israeli reconnaissance drone in the aftermath of a military operation in Jenin in April 2002. Palestinian sources claim that the Israelis had massacred hundreds of civilians and that they had to bury their dead. In this particular case, the men accidentally tipped the funeral bier, dropping the corpse. When they regroup, the corpse climbs back on the bier. Later, a crowd has joined the procession. The pallbearers drop the man again. The crowd scatters, frightened perhaps at seeing the dead man stir with life. But the pallbearers regroup, the corpse climbs forthrightly on the bier. And once again, they wrap him in the winding sheet.
Go ahead.
Welcome to Pallywood.
You know, I'm going to stop it there because it's a bit long. But, I mean, you see for yourself. And I wouldn't make the claim that all of the news is staged, and I wouldn't believe it to be true. But as you can see, there are examples where there are people who are manufacturing dissent. They're manufacturing the news. I mean, I don't know. I'm curious to know what you think about it. It's terrifying stuff. Now, it's journalists' responsibility to not report what is obviously fabrications. But a lot of the time, our media just take surface quotes for their merit. You know, if there's a claim made by a certain organization, they'll just report it. They'll put it in as a quote. They won't ask and delve any further. You know, I'm going to show you an example. I think it's just coming up. Here's a quote. This is just last week. The Toronto Star, their Mideast bureau chief, Oakland Ross, who I think is a fantastic reporter, really top-notch journalist. If you can't see, I'll just read it a bit for you. But he quoted a Hamas official who said the following. A Hamas representative said yesterday that 5 patients died over the weekend in Gaza hospitals because of the latest fuel embargo. Now, what Oakland forgot to mention is that both Israeli and Palestinian officials denied that this ever happened. In other words, there is no evidence to support the claim that because Israel had prevented some kind of delivery of fuel, that as a result of this, that innocent Palestinians had died. So that's a very serious error. Now, as an organization, just to tell you how we approach this, there's some people who said, you know what, you can send off an alert and have a couple thousand people complain, because essentially what this claim tantamount and is paramount to is essentially collective punishment. And that's, you know, it's something that doesn't deserve any kind of merit. It's totally untrue. So we basically called up the Toronto Star, spoke to their public editor, who's sort of like an ombudsman, brought our concerns to their attention. And I should say that within, I think, 2 days, the Toronto Star promptly and very professionally, in a follow-up report, clarified the situation and actually said that, you know, there was no actual record of this actually taking place. They basically went on record as correcting an error that their own reporter had done. So that, journalistically, I think that's fantastic, and I think it's very responsible. At the same time, how many people read the follow-up article to read this correction? Most people were left with this impression that because Israel had blockaded the Gaza Strip, that 5 innocent Palestinian civilians died. Now this is, I'd like to pose it that this kind of misinformation largely affects, a lot of the foreign policy decisions that are made in Canada and abroad. So it's absolutely essential that the media get it right the first time, because there are very, very serious consequences if they don't. I'll show you some more examples. There's I don't know if there's any Montrealers in the audience. A couple. Okay. Are you familiar with a student newspaper called the Concordia Link? No? Okay, fair enough. So on top of monitoring the mainstream Canadian media, we also have a function that we're also looking at the campus papers. And we came across something actually on September 11th, ironically. There was an op-ed where they had a guy by the name of Barnaby Geisweiler who made this claim, and I'm going to read it out loud for you. He said in an opinion piece that since I have been here, and he's reporting from the Gaza Strip, I have seen Israel invade on an almost daily basis. 3 times so far, they have dragged a man out onto the street and executed him. No arrest, no court hearing, just a bullet. How about that? It's an unbelievable statement. It's so unbelievable that it actually didn't happen. Now, I have a feeling you understand that if this really did happen, this would be front page news. This would be huge. The media would love to slam Israel for this. But this didn't happen. And this paper, though a campus paper, didn't act responsibly and actually do any kind of fact-checking before it actually went to print. Now, I should also mention that a campus audience is very vulnerable and very impressionable. And I think a lot of the media bias that exists on campuses largely contribute to an unfortunate attitude among pro-Israel supporters that they're afraid to put up an Israeli flag, to wear a kippah. If you look at campus activism, for one, I mean, it's as hot as it's ever been. You go to York University, there's almost a daily or a weekly protest. Concordia, the same thing. 2002, Bibi Netanyahu came to speak at the school, and there was a riot and forced him not to speak. So campus activism is huge. So in monitoring a campus audience, it's equally important. So as an organization, when we came across this claim, first and foremost, we did our research. We looked into any possible claim that this could have existed. Because for all things considered, I'd never heard about it, so I needed to do my research. We couldn't find anything, nor could a bunch of reporters and experts that we had hired. And then, very simply, we contacted the editor-in-chief and asked him if he could confirm the veracity of his writer's claims. And we asked him to basically provide us with any kind of proof. And to our dismay, he was unable to. Couldn't provide a shred of evidence after a lot of negotiations with the paper, and after putting out an alert where we had something like a couple hundred letters sent to the paper. They finally, realized that there's a lot of pressure, and they made a serious mistake. And I'm going to show you the correction that they put out just a couple weeks later. Again, I apologize if it's a little hard to read. I'll read it for you. Correction. The link published on September 11th, an opinion piece called Living with Terrorists, stating that Israeli soldiers executed 3 men in the West Bank city of Nablus, while Ra'ed Abu Abbas was in fact shot and killed by soldiers. Mahmoud Fatayr and Wajdi Moudi were killed in an explosion, the responsibility for which has not been claimed. I want to go back to the original claim. He said, and I quote, 3 times so far they've dragged a man out onto the street and executed him. No arrest, no court hearing, just a bullet. But now, in this very dismal correction, they now claim it was an explosion. What's the deal? This is a completely different story. It's so unbelievable that this correction is a bad correction and deserves a correction of the correction, but we didn't go that far. I should also mention that they mention a guy by the name of Ra'ed Abu Abbas, who was shot and killed by soldiers. What they failed to mention was that he was, because he's killed, the former leader of Islamic Jihad, a terrorist organization. This is a very, in my 4 years at Honest Reporting, I hadn't come across a situation where somebody clearly lied and with the obvious intention of making Israel look bad. This was a very, very serious issue. And I should say that it was largely with the efforts of our members who wrote en masse that we were able to actually make the link be responsible and put out a correction. Behind the scenes, the paper also acknowledged that no longer will they ever accept any contributions by this writer. So that's an important statement by the paper. That's a good question. To be honest, I don't know. I would estimate, because it's a campus paper, probably under 10,000, but I couldn't give you a real answer.
To take this paper, and I'm the biggest fan in the world of university, biggest fan, but to take this little link, whatever it is, and give it so much credence and so much stature, I mean, it's almost a joke to me.
It's an interesting question. There are certain media outlets out there who are very small in readership, who might have political ideologies. Do they deserve to be monitored? Do they deserve to actually be reproved? I'd like to pose it that yes, that because this goes to a campus audience where innocent students are being manipulated, that it is very important, regardless of the fact that it's a small readership. But thank you for your comment. I'm going to show you a couple other examples. These are just obviously pictures of protests that have happened in Toronto. You've got Concordia here, you've got York University there. You have a quick look. Let's play a little game if you can. I want to involve you as much as I can. So Let's see if you can spot some of the errors that we've come across. Here's a report that was aired on CBC Around the World, which is kind of a half-hour news segment about international news. It's on, I think, at 7 o'clock on News World. It was at the time of the Six-Day War, the anniversary of the Six-Day War. And this was in June 5th, 2007. And I'll show you what reporter Sarika Segal said, and let's see if you can spot the error.
About 16 kilometers down the road from Jerusalem, there were demonstrations against the Israel occupation today. Palestinians marked the 40th anniversary with a march calling for an end to the occupation. The beginning of the Six-Day War is considered a black day in the West Bank, with the Palestinian defeat complicating the Arab-Israeli conflict.
So that's like a 25, 30-second report, but it had a very serious error. This gentleman in the back. Close. 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 You had it right the first time.
Palestinian defeat. There's a Palestinian. We didn't have a war with Palestinians.
That's right.
Wars with Judeans.
That's right. But you have to understand, and I don't think this was an intentional error on the part of CBC, but I would like to point out that this is their own ignorance and not understanding that there was no war with the Palestinians. And I'm going to show you that, basically, just to tell you, I spotted this. It took a little while to recognize that this was a serious problem. I picked up the phone, I called an editor at CBC, and they agreed that it was an error. And they professionally did put out a correction. Again, the problem is how many people are going to see that correction, how many people are going to be misled by this original really bad report. I'll show you the correction. Have a clip.
Before we leave the Middle East, we want to correct something we said 2 weeks ago. While reporting on the anniversary of the Six-Day War, we referred to Israel's capture of the West Bank and Gaza as a Palestinian defeat. We should have called it an Arab defeat. Palestinians, of course, have no military forces in that conflict.
So I think it's fantastic that the CBC lived up to its journalistic standards and policies, which they do have strict policies.
It's an Arab defeat. It's not an Arab defeat.
Right.
It's not a Christian defeat. It's not a religious.
So it's all a matter of how they couch the terms, right? And you have to understand, imagine how difficult it is to report on Israel. For one, imagine you're a journalist in the region, and you have to pump out a story because you have very tight deadlines because your editor's on your back. Meanwhile, you're reporting from the region, you have to put out copy, and let's say you're in Gaza and it's a very dangerous area, and yet at the same time you make an error like this and you have organizations like us who are just hounding you because of it. So it's very difficult, and people do make mistakes. And I should say that, obviously with the advent of the internet and 24-hour news cycle, it's much easier to do the job that we do because there is online records of everything. So, and you can monitor just as much as we do. I'll show you a couple more examples. Here's a report. I don't know if there's any CTV fans. I hope there are. I think it's a great program. They have a program called Canada AM. So if you're up that early, which I hope you're not, but I think it's 6:30 to 9. And they did a segment about how there was an emissary from the Middle East who was coming to visit Canada. And let's see if you can spot the error.
Prime Minister Stephen Harper will be visiting with King Abdullah of Jordan today in Ottawa, and during that meeting, Harper is expected to announce $8 million in funding for the Palestinian Authority. The Canadian Press reports Ottawa is lifting its funding freeze now that the Hamas has been removed from the Palestinian government. Hamas is considered a terrorist group by Canada and other Western countries.
So, whoa, okay, everyone's going to be, I love it. This is fantastic.
Like a cowboy from Saudi Arabia.
There you go. Yeah, I think it's great, by the way, that in a 30-second report she managed to mention that Hamas is a terrorist organization. That apart. But it's a very subtle error. It's staring at everybody right in their face. Gentleman mentioned in the back that the picture that they have right there is not the Jordanian King Hussein.
The one on the right was the Jordanian.
This is this is the Saudi Arabian. So CTV, and this has, I should say, really nothing to do with Israel, but it does show what I'd like to show, and what I hope it demonstrates is that there are a lot of people in the news world, in the news business, who really don't know the difference between two of the biggest leaders in the Middle East. that they're basically, they're tight deadlines and they have to grab something, put it in, okay, done. But this misled a Saudi audience to believe that a very big emissary was coming to Canada to meet with Prime Minister Harper. So that's an error. Now, as an organization, normally I wouldn't contact CTV, but I was bored that day and I said, this is fun. I kind of just wanted to show them at one point that we're always watching. Regardless, we're watching the Middle East. You should know, they got a really good laugh when they realized that they made this error. And I'll show you the correction that they put out the following day, because they are responsible, and they wanted to set the record straight. I'll show you that.
Can I just ask one question?
Can I just right after the quote? Sorry.
And just a note, yesterday we incorrectly showed you a photo of King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia and identified him as the King of Jordan.
So, there you go. So, sorry? Japanese? I didn't see it. It's a gentleman in the back.
How good do you feel? How good do you feel the sort of Arab PR?
They're very good. I think they're very good. I should also say that for Israel to get a good PR message out, it's incredibly difficult. One, because for Israel to do PR, it doesn't have the biggest budget. When Bibi Netanyahu was prime minister, he pretty much disbanded the Hasbara campaign and PR. So, but the Arab PR is very good. They're very good at making sure that if you're telling the story about people being oppressed or victimized, that it's for the most part a very soft-spoken woman who's telling that message who maybe people would be sympathetic to. But they're very good, and it's very difficult. You look at Israeli PR efforts, and they're being bombarded by thousands of requests for quotes, and it's very tough. I think one of the difficulties in Israel, and I presume most of you have been there, Israel has never been really known as a service kind of country. If you go and get a falafel, you're most likely to be told to piss off before being thanked for your business. It's part of the Sabra kind of effect. It's something that we're trying to work with journalists to make sure that, with the foreign media and the Foreign Press Association to make sure that they're able to get the proper message out in the right way. It's very difficult, though. Yeah. Gentleman in the front.
The relevance of the King of Jordan to the Palestinians within Israel doesn't make any sense. And are there not two governments in the Palestinian Authority? One is Mahmoud Abbas, and one is Hamas. Is that not correct?
That is correct. I'm just not sure what the point is.
Well, that was another. There were two additional errors.
Actually, at the time, this is July 12th. So, of 2007. So I'm not sure when there was that the takeover. So I don't know. Maybe it was after that, but it could be. Yeah, that's definitely a great point. Sorry. So I'll show you another clip. This is a CBC program. Now you should know CBC. Even though the CRTC has basically said that Al Jazeera is pretty much off limits, the ruling. We know Al Jazeera to be a very problematic news source. CRTC basically said in order for a news organization to host content from Al Jazeera, you had to monitor it 24/7 to ensure that there wasn't any really bad content. And there was community leaders who were really worried that if you bring Al Jazeera into Canada, that there would be anti-Semitic content and really, virulently anti-Semitic, very dangerous stuff on there. CBC decided, we're not going to put out the entire content of Al Jazeera, but we're going to put out samplers. So they put out some reports from Al Jazeera, and here they have a report on October 23rd, 2007, by an Al Jazeera correspondent who did a feature on Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. What we called this, in an alert that we sent out, we basically said that this reporter clearly whitewashed who these prisoners are in the fact that she failed at any possible opportunity to ever mention that some of these prisoners are in Israeli jails as a result of carrying out attacks on Israelis. That some of these prisoners have what's known in terms as blood on their hands. These are very dangerous people. This reporter, and you'll listen to the report, I'm going to play it for you so you can judge for yourself. She basically calls these prisoners fighters against the occupation. She even says that they're political prisoners. And, everything aside, this is the CBC. Your tax dollars are going to support this. Your tax dollars are going to put Al Jazeera content. just keep that in mind. I'll play the clip.
Palestinians took to the streets today to protest the death of a Palestinian prisoner who died in an Israeli jail. Israeli officials say the man was hit with a non-lethal weapon and later died in hospital. But not everyone believes that story. Jackie Rowland of the Al Jazeera English Network explains.
The aftermath of clashes between Israeli guards and Palestinian prisoners at a jail in the Negev. Prison officials say the violence erupted when guards went through the cells looking for weapons. Prisoners threw stones. Guards responded using what they described as non-lethal weapons. News of the prison riot has provoked outrage across the occupied territories. There are more than 10,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails, and they're widely respected as fighters against the occupation. In towns across the West Bank, Palestinians have been making their anger felt. Here in Ramallah, it's the mothers who've taken the lead. They feel like the Israelis have locked up their sons and thrown away the key.
This is not, as a prisoners, we can't see, nobody can visit him. He's all Jerusalem. This is a woman, she has 7 prisoners in prison, all her family, all her kids. Nobody can visit them.
People here don't buy the Israeli version of events at the jail, especially now that one prisoner has died of his wounds. Palestinian police are having to calm Palestinian outrage. It's an explosive atmosphere just weeks before peace talks are due to take place in the United States.
There is no agreement without releasing all the Palestinian prisoners from the Israeli jails. It is one item, one important item. Any agreement we shall reach with the Israelis.
In Gaza too, people are letting their feelings be known. Almost every Palestinian family has a relative who is either in jail or who has been in jail. Ordinary people want their leaders to put more pressure on Israel to let the prisoners go home. Jackie wrote.
So in your impression, was this a fair report that CBC put out? No. Why though? This question why? I mean, did at any point... Why not Al Jazeera? Sorry, yes, in the back there?
They didn't put the mothers of the people that they killed.
That's very good. So that's essentially, the CBC has failed to provide any kind of balance. You should know that the CBC has mandated that within every individual report, they have to try to achieve what is known as equitable balance. The CBC failed to present the alternate and equal side. They failed to point out that yes, some of these Palestinians are in jail, but why? Some of these people carried out some of the most horrible and horrendous terrorist attacks. But according to this report, these are fighters against the occupation. These are political prisoners. This is a serious problem. Sir?
Even more serious, they didn't point out the other Palestinian viewpoint, the one of the Palestinians who are afraid to come forward, which would balance this report greatly. The ones who are not in favor of the prisoners and the bombings and the suicides.
I should also say that, probably one of the problems with the media is that they forget to report on, there is a very serious moderate element within Palestinian society, but we also don't hear that. I think that's what you're speaking to there. Yeah, definitely. As an organization, we came across this, we sent out an alert. Our members wrote en masse. The CBC initially, basically told us, leave us alone. It was a fair report. The CBC defended this report as being fair and balanced. Their logic, though flawed, was basically that over time, the CBC will balance itself out. In other words, 2 weeks from now, if the CBC mentions that some of these Palestinian prisoners were in jail for attacks on Israelis, then that's okay, that's fair. But again, the problem is, how many people are regular viewers of a particular program who are going to be able to judge a report 2 weeks ago from the one today? Gentlemen.
I also have a problem with some of the language and the terminology, like occupiers and occupation versus militants or fighters.
Definitely. The media use euphemisms like it's part of their pocket diction. It's a serious problem.
But each word has a very distinct agenda.
An agenda, a serious connotation. Now, this is I should also, this is an Al Jazeera report, which means that CBC itself did not create this report, but they just took the report from Al Jazeera and put it on their content. That does not mean that they're not responsible for it. In fact, the CBC is required to vet that report to make sure that it adheres to their standards of journalism and codes of conduct, of which they clearly did not. So after a lot of people wrote, I think it was one of our records, I think we had a little over 300 to 400 letters sent to the CBC. A couple days later, their Mideast bureau chief, Peter Armstrong, great reporter, maybe achieved this kind of balance largely from our efforts, and he actually makes mention of the fact that some of these Palestinian prisoners in jail are in jail because they have blood on their hands. I'm going to show you a quick clip.
Next week, an important step on the long and deadly road to peace in the Middle East, a conference to restart talks will be held in Annapolis, Maryland. All the major players are expected. Today, Israel tried to bridge some differences with Palestinian leaders by releasing hundreds of political prisoners. Watching it all, the CBC's Peter Armstrong in Jerusalem. Peter.
The Israeli cabinet approved the release of 441 Palestinian prisoners this morning, a goodwill gesture, they say, leading up to this Annapolis conference set to take place in the United States next week. The Palestinians, of course, wanted more. There are some 9,000 Palestinians being held in Israeli jails and prisons. The prisoners, we're told, are mostly aligned with the Fatah movement, and none of them have what they call blood on their hands, meaning none of these prisoners were involved in any successful attacks against Israelis. Already, though, we're hearing from people that are opposed.
That's a good point that you picked up successful, and I apologize, I'm going to cut it there just because I know we are short for time. But there you saw just that he did mention the blood on the hands, but that is a good point, the successful attacks. I mean, sir? Yeah?
A couple of things.
Sorry.
How does the Canadian schools of journalism handle this kind of stuff?
Not really following. Are you saying, do Canadian journalism schools teach journalists how to be professional or how to not make these kind of mistakes? I'm not sure what the question is. Yes?
The other thing, on the agenda 3 weeks ago, they reported that the Israeli planes were indiscriminately bombing from a height that they couldn't see the targets, similar to the other guys throwing the rockets into Israel. And I checked on that, and the Israeli bombs are smart, electronically guided, and they fall within about a foot of where they're aimed, no matter how high the planes are. And CP can sort of equate it one with the other.
To be honest, I didn't see that report. So I don't know if I could, I didn't see that report, so I don't know if I can really comment on it. Yeah, apologize. Sorry, are there any other questions? Gentleman in the back.
I don't know whether you're intentionally trying to be very even-handed, but you say Open Ross, a fantastic journalist. You mean, like...
I mean that.
You do?
I do.
So
You should know he's also one of the very few journalists in Canada who's actually calling a spade. He's actually using the terror word to call people like the PFLP, Islamic Jihad, Hamas, terrorist. I mean, this is what the Canada Gazette and our Canadian government dictates as a terrorist organization. This is a gentleman, a reporter in Canada, who's actually doing that. That's just one example I can use.
Making these serious omissions, I'm wondering if these are fantastic journalists, I hate to see what lets you down.
That's a good point. I think the error that I pointed to before was an error of sloppiness and not of intention, a failure to show that there was some kind of distance. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going to try to continue in just a sec. Sorry. So, and this is really what our presentation is about. What you as concerned citizens can actually do to sort of replicate what we're doing. But I mean, we travel all over Canada, from Winnipeg to BC to the Maritimes, and trying to create sort of, I don't want to use the word cells, but here goes. Basically people who are going to be ambassadors for fair media coverage, who are going to let us know if they spot something that they think is unfair, and then we can either respond or have people respond en masse. The power of numbers again. So what you guys can do, I think at the very least, you've already done by coming here today and listening to this presentation. But here are just a couple quick sources of how you can better educate yourself. Myths and Facts, if you've ever read it, it's by Mitchell Bard. It's, the quintessential primer on every possible question you could have on the Arab-Israeli conflict. And I should also say that I use the word Arab-Israeli conflict. What the media tend to report as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I think, is a very loaded term. I think in reality there is only the Arab-Israeli conflict, and to deny that on Israel's borders that there are states who are sponsoring terrorism on a daily basis is a real injustice. And essentially when you hear of the story of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I mean, it's clearly a very obvious canard that's being concocted by autocratic regimes to deny some of the most horrible atrocities that are going on in their regions. But Canadian media are taking this up, and not just the Canadian, the international media have clearly bought into this mindset. Now, but you look at Canada, it has a historic opportunity when it can foster freedoms and human rights in the broader Middle East, but largely we can't do this because we don't hear about what's going on in the Middle East. We don't hear that Arab women are suffering under gender apartheid, that Arab women are struggling to find a role in their traditionally male-dominated societies. We don't hear about the horrible repression. We don't hear about the fact that Saudi Arabia on a bi-monthly basis or something to that effect are hanging dissidents of the government. It's our media's responsibility to report on these areas, and there's a lot of reasons why they don't report there. A lot of the time it's because of their own safety. A lot of the time it's because it's very difficult to get that kind of story out. It's very expensive. But it's our responsibility to make sure we're getting a complete picture of the region. So it's definitely an uphill battle. I'm going to put a hold on the questions for just 1 second. So, very simple way of doing this kind of advocacy, which is what it is that we're actually doing. You can write a very simple letter to the editor. How many of you have ever written a letter to the editor? I've got a couple hands. Okay. So I don't know if there's any budding journalists here. It's very, very easy to do. Here are a couple just quick suggestions of how to write a very effective letter to the editor. So, one, be quick. So if you listen or read a program, read a newspaper today, and you think that something's inaccurate, misleading, if there's opinion that's disguised as news, then write a letter today. And or if you're going to contact a particular reporter or a senior or foreign editor, do it today. Because if you do it 2 weeks from now, that letter is not going to be printed, and nobody's going to care. So being prompt is, it's absolutely integral. Do it right away. Second point, and I think it's probably one of the most important, is be polite. And I should say that, on average, I get about a couple hundred letters a week, people who are CCing me on their letters to the media, or who are just actually sending letters to the editor to myself in regards to an article that I actually wrote. But, I got to say, about half of them have profanity in them. Half of them, people are swearing. It's a very passionate topic, what we're talking about. But people, for some reason, tend to be they go over the top, making baseless accusations that a particular media outlet or reporter is anti-Semitic, that they have a personal agenda against the state of Israel. I mean, these kind of things do not help with the marketplace of ideas. They do not help for constructive dialogue with the media. So I would encourage you to be very professional, to point out specifically what was problematic in the specific report, because at a certain point, we're trying to educate the media. We don't want them to do this again. We want to sensitize them. I mean, our goal, essentially, is to prevent unfair media coverage from actually ever happening. So, and I think you guys can play a serious role in that. Another one is be concise. For some reason, people tend to write huge diatribe essays and letters, 600-700 words long. You don't need to. They're not going to be printed, I should also say. The letter section, which actually I believe it's one of the most read sections in a newspaper, it doesn't have that much word allotted. So you can maybe have 100 words, 60 words. In fact, I would argue that some of the best letters that I've ever read have been 20 words long. So, and it's also very important because your voice is being stated on a very important medium. Regular people like you want to hear what you have to say.
Brevity is bliss.
Brevity is bliss, absolutely. I agree. So, be specific, stay focused, use the CC button, in other words, carbon copy, let your friends, family, teachers, anyone you know about your concerns, have them have an eye on your letter. And finally, and probably maybe even the most important, at the very bottom, include your contact information. The media need to be able to confirm your identity, otherwise they can't print your letter. So write your full address, write your name. They're going to call you to verify that you wrote this letter, otherwise they're going to go to print. I mean, I could say I'm Prime Minister Harper and send an email from stephenharper@gmail.com, but if they can't prove your identity, they won't be able to print it. So very simple. I'm going to show you a couple really bad letters that we've come across. These are actual letters sent to Canadian media outlets. Dear sir, your editorial writer is an ignorant idiot. What is that? Now we talked about brevity, and I think that is important. But that's 7 words, and it might be correct for all things considered. But for one, how does this help a particular media outlet do better the next time? How does it educate them? Does this person who wrote this letter actually believe that this is going to go to print? I don't think so. It's a really bad letter. They'll read it at least, and for one, the person who's going to read this letter is going to be upset that you're wasting his time, because it's the letter's editor or a journalist or reporter or editor's responsibility to take their readers' concerns to heart. By saying you're ignorant, and it just doesn't help. If I was working at McDonald's and somebody came up to me and said that to me, they'd be pretty pissed off. So there's another one. Dear sir, is your reporter an anti-Semite or is he an ignorant fool? Which description is more accurate? Actual letters. Now, I mentioned before, charging the media with anti-Semitism is counterproductive. I don't believe it to be true, and I would say that it is impossible to prove it. Don't use it. It weakens what anti-Semitism actually is. Really poor letter. Finally, dear sir, is it any wonder why Jews keep canceling your biased and sick paper? That closes it off very well. I should also say, as an organization, we clearly do not advocate any kind of a divestment campaign. I think they're counterproductive. In fact, I encourage every one of you to pick up as many subscriptions to as many different media outlets. Read as many as you can. If you, for instance, don't like the Globe and Mail or the Toronto Star, then you buy their paper. Or if you don't want to give them money because you don't want to support it, and I understand, read it online, because most of the content that is in print is also available online. So check it out. And just to give you just a brief look, if you're not familiar with our format, this is kind of what our action alerts actually look like. Basically, we'll point out the specific report or article, and you can read it for yourself. You can make your own judgment of whether you agree with us that this is unprofessional journalism or something's inaccurate. And then at the bottom, very simply, we'll give you the contact information of who you can write a letter or pick up the phone and contact to try to seek some kind of a reasonable remedy. Again, let's try not to be reactionary and strident, but be professional. Gentleman back.
Sir, I lecture around this province on a thing called Understanding the Media. You would not believe, and with all due respect to the people here, how people do not know how news gets into a newspaper, how news gets on television, how pictures get in. People can't even tell you the difference between a tabloid or a broadsheet. They can't tell you the difference between a column and a report. So, what I'm trying to do, and I think maybe you would probably think about doing as well, the first thing we have to do is understand the news. Then we could be critics of it. But if you don't understand how these things work, or how to even write a simple report, it's very, very hard. And you'll have biases, you'll have all these kind of unbelievable kind of...
I got to say, I'm a journalist. My background is journalism, so I have a better understanding of the whole process of journalism. At the same time, though, if I go to a school and I'm speaking to a humanities class and I teach them about media literacy and how to point out these kind of problems, without understanding the actual day-to-day process of journalism, these are people who actually can recognize, just as you all have tonight, how something can be so wrong and how it's so easy to make some kind of change. So do they really need to know the serious flow of journalism, that there's news coming in from the wires, that they're under huge deadlines? I think it helps, but at the same time, I don't think it impedes people to actually make a media interaction.
I do documentaries. There's a thing called Counterpoint. I once did it on kids hockey. A documentary in Counterpoint on hockey. It was based to show how the parents are abusing the kids and the coaches. And whatever the coaches did, I edited it, that the kids would do the opposite. But people don't understand how this works. And that's how news works. And that's how, words, the same words.
Yeah, I hear your point. Maybe it's just a matter of opinion. I don't think it's, by a lack of knowledge of journalism process, I don't think it should prohibit any kind of interaction. Lady in front.
Wouldn't it be better if Israel would have an Al Jazeera?
Would it be better if Israel had an Al Jazeera?
Instead of teaching us this.
Maybe they do.
I'm not sure what you mean by having an Al Jazeera. You mean having Al Jazeera reporting in Israel? Because they do. They do. They do. And I should also say that the Israeli government, to their wisdom, has opened up a new division where basically Israeli spokesmen are speaking to the Arab media. Actually, the former second secretary of the Israeli embassy in Ottawa, Ophir Gendelman, is now heading up that division. So here you have an Israeli who speaks Arabic, who's able to tell the story about, at least give the Israeli perspective about what's going on to Al Jazeera, to Saudi Arabian TV, and those kind of things. So definitely there is a necessity to do that.
You misunderstood my question.
No, I'm sorry.
I mean that Israel should have an outlet like Al Jazeera promoting itself.
Oh. Well, I mean, for one, I wouldn't...
Tell me, I'm trying to my co-workers to say about Israel. That's not what we're knowing from the media about Israel.
Well,
it's not what we're listening from Israel.
Yeah, I wouldn't think it would be in Israel's benefit to put out propaganda or lies or mistruths. I mean, Israel has media outlets. It has Jerusalem Post, it has Haaretz, Yediot Aharonot, it has television news. I mean, it's out there. It definitely has news coverage.
The Canadians don't read Haaretz.
I read it. I know a lot of people who definitely read it.
So you're preaching to the converted.
That's true. And to be honest, I'm probably guilty of that. And I would encourage you, if you're interested, I come and I speak at anywhere. And I would love to come and speak to non-Jewish audiences. I speak at a lot of Christian audiences. I've spoken at a couple Muslim audiences and was well received. So I definitely agree that this is the kind of issue that we're talking about, fair media coverage for Israel and the Middle East. It's not an issue just for Jews or for Muslim people. I mean, it's an issue for Canadians because it's for, yeah, I agree.
Canadians, Americans, the whole world.
Sorry.
That's not what we know about Israel.
Earlier in your presentation, you showed the corpse falling off and then jumping back on a couple of times, and the man shooting into the empty room. How on earth did you get hold of these obviously fake attempts at Arab propaganda?
Sure, and I should mention that that's not a film that we created. It's a film by an organization called The Second Draft. To be honest, and that's a very good question. You should always question even the stuff that I'm putting out. I mean, all of that stuff was in the news. I mean, they showed footage there from France 2. That was France 2 footage from some of the stuff that you're speaking to. So that was actual, a legitimate news organization. Sorry, in front.
Before we just understand the media, we need to understand ourselves. For example, we've been duped, for lack of a better word, into using the word suicide bomber, where in fact our interest should be focused on the victims of the heinous murders by calling them, as was mentioned 10 years ago, the homicide bombers. And we should educate ourselves by coming to other such lectures, especially one on Tuesday by Rabbi Tannenbaum.
Shameless plug. Go for it.
At the York Woods Library between Finch and Keele, between Keele and Jane on the south side of Finch, where he'll be speaking with a Hindu, and Hindus are our biggest potential ally. 1.5 billion people, peaceful people on this earth, not to mention the Buddhists, as Rabbi Allen lectured in the last 2 weeks. And I expect that many of you should be coming to this lecture to show the support of the Jewish community, and it's at 7:30 p.m. this coming Tuesday, February.
7:30 p.m. this coming Tuesday. That sounds like a great lecture, it really does. Yeah.
I just want to make a statement.
Sure.
Regarding those mothers who were crying for their kids or for their husbands like it was, I know personally somebody from Toronto. This young girl, her name is Marie Timmerman, was sent by her parents to Israel for a holiday. She came back in a box. She was killed by shrapnel. They have a monument for her in the Orville Park. Now, that should be there opposite the mothers who are crying for their...
I agree. And that's an integral story that we very rarely hear. Gentleman in the far back.
Given the fact that the Arab way of life is to exaggerate, lie, carry on, that's the normal method of their lifestyle, so to speak. Now, they keep on doing it. We catch them several times. The Janine, for example. How can you and the media change this and why do people keep on getting duped?
Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of it is laziness, for one. But I think that you look at a guy like Saeb Erekat, a guy who went on CNN and basically, you mentioned Janine, he went on CNN and basically said thousands of Palestinians are being massacred. His statements exactly, without any kind of proof. And we all know that myth has been dispelled widely. But yet people continue to quote Saeb Erekat as being an authoritative source. I'd like to say, and sometimes I would call when these kind of instances happen, that these people are no longer credible sources. So people who are proven to lie on a daily basis, who are spewing propaganda, it's the media's responsibility to say, I'm not gonna take your quote. You're not a credible source. So that's, I mean, as a community, what can we do? If we happen to notice if there's somebody who's being quoted on a regular basis who has a very questionable resume in terms of whatever they're affiliated with, who is known to lie and spew outright propaganda, these are people who shouldn't be allowed a forum to express these kind of views. That's my opinion. Sir?
So why don't we do another thing to attack one of those newspapers, by being nasty to them, to be sued. And once you are sued, so you bring the thing open into court.
You want to encourage you want them to sue you. So you want to encourage like a libel suit or something like that.
And bring it in the open, and let the media comes in.
It's one way. I don't know if I'm so. I think it's a little bit dangerous and risky. I think there might be a little bit better ways to get the message out. But you never know. I've never pushed that kind of an idea.
It's done all the time.
Okay.
Oh no, it's not done all the time. You asked this fellow by the name of David Frum, who sued with the Canada Arab Federation. He wishes he could bury himself because he started with a foolish man.
Okay. Lady in the front.
I just think what people are trying to say here is, and maybe I'm misunderstanding them, but I think that the point that's trying to be raised here towards you is that you keep talking about how we can react to things that are out there, and people here are trying to be proactive, and they're trying to ask you,
right,
what can we do? And
before
they have their own suggestions, but I think basically that's what everyone is trying to get to move us from the point of, we're the miskenim, under the drama, that things are being done to us, what can we do, how can we go past the drama of,
right,
they're doing me wrong, and into the reality of proactiveness and, educating those reporters before they even come out of those schools,
yeah,
et cetera, and so forth.
That's a fantastic question. It really is, and it's a very, I would argue, it's probably one of the most difficult things that you can do, and it's largely because the media do not want to be told what to report. For instance, if I would encourage a campaign for the media that they have to report on this specific story, they would tell me, go away, don't tell me how to do my job, I know how I'm doing it. There's clever ways to do it. I mean, I should tell you that as an organization, we monitor the media's coverage over time. We do bias studies. So if I happen to notice that CBC or the Toronto Star has not made any mention of the Qassam rocket attacks a couple of weeks ago, 220 rockets hit the city, and there was no mention or scant mention, or if it was footnoted, I'm going to bring that to the editor's attention, and I'm going to show that over time, factually, you have failed to tell a balanced story. I mean, that's what I can do as an organization. As individuals, as citizens, feel free to write a letter ahead of time. It doesn't have to be reactive. You can tell the story of Israel. You can tell of the situation, what's going on there. Feel free to write op-eds. I mean, a lot of people do in the community. Just because we're not formal journalists doesn't mean that we don't have a voice. And I should say that newspapers specifically are always looking for fresh voices. So, definitely submit those kind of things. You can contact and phone up a specific foreign editor, have a discussion about the situation, talk about it. It doesn't have to be reactive. You can just educate it, and beside contrary belief, they will pick up the phone and have a reasonable dialogue with you. So those are just a couple ways. just as citizen journalists, that you can make some kind of change. I hope that answers your question. Sorry, guy.
Just to digress for a second, a big thing happening now in our media, and some are probably very well noticed, the name of Moran, Stern, and McLean. Apparently, the publishing of these cartoons. And I'd like to know if you've come across this during your tenure.
The story of McLean's being sued by... yeah, I've read, obviously it's a little outside of our mandate and what we're doing. So I don't know my particular opinion on it. I think the fact that McLean's is being taken to a Human Rights Commission as a result of having an article that is what certain individuals claim is it spurs Islamophobia. I think it's an atrocity. I think it prevents free expression. If people had a real problem with the article, maybe they should write a letter to the editor. But that's a whole other issue, I got to be honest.
So I sit here, in a couple of the major magazines in Germany, they've shown Jews sucking on the udders of the pigs and stuff like that, all in the name of cartoons. We never say anything about this. And yet when this comes up, it's international news. So is there in the world something that's going on that the PR department is, is that strong? Now, right here now, still in Germany, with a major man, published these things, I think
I would argue that if we found, basically what you're referring to is called poisonous pen, if there was an anti-Semitic cartoon in a newspaper in Canada, we would seriously take issue with that. That's the kind of stuff that does not deserve to be on our Canadian papers. Are we good for time? And just out of curiosity, maybe I'm just going to wrap up. I apologize. I'm going to stick around for all of your questions, but you're really asking.
You mentioned it now.
Sure.
What's the difference? How would you define the difference between your honest reporting and between ADL?
Well, specifically, I would say that we're not a media watchdog for Jewish causes, and it's very close, but we are monitoring the media's coverage of Israel. And yes, at times they do fall into the same category. Anti-Defamation League, you'd have to ask them what their mandate is, but I think that they're trying to ensure that Jews aren't being targeted and attacked and that there is an anti-Semitism. I really don't know their mandate, though, I got to be honest.
You don't have any dialogue
For human
with
rights?
other organizations such as this one?
I mean, we work with the organized community. Specifically, I've never had a discussion with the ADL, I got to be honest. Yeah. But I just want to say thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I know it's a blisteringly cold night, and I really do appreciate it. I would encourage you, outside there are sign-up sheets if you're interested in signing up to receive our alerts. And I should say we don't spam, we're free. We send out once every 2 weeks. But I think it's all of our responsibility to try to affect change, and it's time for some honest reporting as it comes. So I'm going to stick around, so if you have any other questions, I'll be right here. Thank you very much. Thank you. My pleasure.